How did we take this home from looking like this to this? Take a look at this magnificent home where we just transformed all the upper trims from an outdated hunter green to a beautiful, fresh, bright white. This was a very challenging project with a lot of difficult to reach access points and areas, and we also had to work with 3 different substrates. We had aluminum gutters, we had vinyl soffit, and we had cedar fascia. If you want to know how we did it, stay tuned. This video's for you. Hey guys, so let's break down what this video is going to be all about. First, we're going to talk about our setup process and more specifically, the equipment and strategies we use to access all these difficult to reach areas around the house. We're going to spend time talking about the towable boom lift with outriggers that we used and the way that we positioned it around the house so that we could really access most of the most difficult areas with that piece of equipment. We're also going to take a look at our job site protection strategies and how we went about protecting critical surfaces from paint splatter. We used a combination of lightweight plastic, cardboard shields, painter's tape, canvas drop cloths, rags, or just some of the things we used to protect the homeowner's property while we worked on this project. We will also spend time talking about our methods for surface preparation. We had 3 different substrates to work with. We had aluminum gutters, we had vinyl soffit, and we had cedar fascia, all that needed to be properly prepared before we could apply paint. We're going to talk about the way that we went about applying paint and our decision to use a combination of micro rollers and brushes on all these difficult to reach areas, and we'll talk about why we didn't spray it as well. Lastly, we will take a look at some of the things we had to do to just properly clean up after ourselves and make sure everything looked beautiful and tight before we left. And of course, we are going to show you the beautiful final results of this project. All right, so let's get at it. This towable electric boom lift was a game changer for us on this job. We did use a lot of different size extension ladders and step ladders to also help, but this boom lift right here, you can see those adjustable outriggers allowed us to self-level the machine on somewhat unlevel ground, and we were able to extend out and reach a high peak on the big side of the house to where there was a bump out and a lot of shrubs and trees and other landscaping features and a slant slope yard. We were able to extend out and easily access it with this 50-foot boom lift. And we used the same positioning there to get up over these trees, and instead of having to fight these trees, trying to fit the extension ladder in there to reach the high upper trim, we used this to just get right up over the top of them, and we were able to extend out and position ourselves to really get all the way to where the deck is. And then once we did that, we were able to easily access the rest of the trim with extension ladders. But just a hugely valuable tool. We also moved the lift to the front yard where we positioned it to get up into this upper high peak and used it to get up over the roof line so we could offload onto the roof and use a ridge hook that you see there so we could safely access some of these difficult to reach areas. We positioned it into another spot on the side of the house where we were able to get up onto the garage roof and use that as a great tool to make our life a lot easier up there. One of the great things about these towable machines is that they're lighter weight, and they have thin wheels, so they're a lot more gentle on the yard when they're being moved in place, assuming that you have relatively dry, hard ground. Some of the drivable, bigger tractor-style boom lifts can really wreak havoc on a yard. Down below there, as I move this, you'll see that I have a green step ladder in place. That's just to make it easier for me to get in and out of the bucket once I lower it. My son Wyatt is down on the ground, and he is a college student working with us this summer. He's been trained on how to operate this machine from the ground level so that if I had a problem up in the air, he can either maneuver the machine from down on the ground or otherwise summon some help. So some other safety notes is you definitely want to wear some fall protection. a harness with a lanyard that is designed to connect to a ring that is welded onto these boom lift buckets. And hard hat protection is also recommended. And you just want to be really careful about overhead hazards, especially electrical lines. Generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend you just going out and renting one of these and starting to use it without having no experience at all or not having somebody with you who has experience. Oftentimes, the rental companies themselves may offer complimentary or low cost training on how to use the machine, as long as they have some notice ahead of time, or they might have specific classes or appointments. As far as the cost of renting this, it was about $1,650 for the week long rental, which certainly isn't inexpensive. But when you have a major undertaking like this, it certainly was worth it when you factor in how effectively and safely we were able to reach some very difficult areas on this project. All right, guys, now let's take a peek at what we did for job site protection, which is very important on a project like this when we are painting all the upper trims. It leaves a lot of room for paint splatters to fall down and land on everything below. So let's take a look at what we did to prevent that. Here's a look at the lightweight plastic we used to cover up the windows and the window screens. You can see we've utilized canvas drop cloths and cardboard shields to cover out the bump outs. There's a metal roof there and then some asphalt shingles. We used quick release painter's tape along the stone. Another shot of more plastic protection, which is important even when you're brushing and rolling. You can still get a lot of splatter down below. There's another angle of the usage of those cardboard shields. This was 21-day quick release tape. Really allowed us to get into these valleys of the vinyl soffit without crashing into stone. Here we had a very tiny vinyl lip between the soffit and the siding, so we utilized tape so that we could really crash into that lip and not have to cut that in with a tiny brush. This is a great trick where you can use a broad knife. This is basically a sheetrock finishing knife, and use that as temporary protection so you can crash into something like this on a roof angle. You could also use cardboard shields in a situation like this, but a broad knife is another great trick of the trade here. We even used it to wedge it underneath this aluminum drip edge so that we could get the brush underneath the drip edge and crash into that wood. That was a concern for that customer. And then here's an example of us just using a rag as temporary protection for a light fixture without having to wrap it up in plastic. All right, guys, so just to recap what we did from a job site protection standpoint, even though we weren't spraying on this job, we still took the idea of job site protection very seriously because the threat of paint splatter falling on things below is still very real. So we definitely prioritize anything that projects out from the wall, such as that porch roof that had the asphalt shingles on it, or the other window bump outs that had metal roofs. They are more likely, if we were to have overhead splatter falling down, because they project out several feet, definitely more likely for paint to land on that. A little bit less likely on the vertical siding that rests tight to the house. Still possible, but less likely. So anything that either projects out or is on ground level, we really prioritize protecting that regardless of the application method. So think of things like driveways, patios, deck materials. You could even landscape rocks, pavers, certainly any sort of outdoor furniture that could be anywhere close. We would definitely want to get that out of the area, or if it was difficult to move, then definitely cover it up. You saw what we did with the light fixture. Uh, if we're only doing a little bit of painting overhead in small bursts of time, rather than wrapping it up, which is certainly an option, we like to use those rags as temporary cover. And then when we move on, take it off. I always have a little bit of a worry if we're going to be working on something for multiple days. Hey, let's not take the chance of that night light popping on and having a potential fire hazard with plastic or paper covering up a hot light bulb. So if we can avoid covering up light fixtures, you'll see us do that. As far as the windows go, to me, they're very easy, efficient, and practical to just cover them up. Even though there's less risk of making a mess of them, certainly versus if you were spraying, you still will get splatter coming from brushes and rollers. And while the glass and the vinyl on windows is relatively easy to clean up, it's still a process. I'll tell you, if you didn't take the screens out and you get paint drips on the screens, those are very difficult to clean. And sometimes it's, I don't want to say impossible, but very difficult to clean them without there still being an image or an impression of a paint splatter on those. So, and to take screens off is certainly an option, but with the time you would need to take them out and then put them back in, you could also very quickly just cover up the entire window. It's very easy to tape them in place or use a plastic paint dispenser and get them covered. And then, regardless of whether you splatter or not, and there's a good chance you'll get some, you don't have to worry about cleaning glass, cleaning the vinyl, or it would certainly worry about cleaning up screens. So we like to cover up windows even in this application, and that's why you saw what you saw on the video. As far as the siding, so we had vinyl siding in most of the areas. That's definitely not as practical to completely cover up. And the other thing I'll say about that is it's also very easy, if you did get a drip on vinyl, to see it, to inspect for it, to check for it before you vacate a work area. And it's also very easy to simply wipe that paint off the vinyl with a wet rag, especially if you see it while it's wet or was just recently dried. Comes off very easy. So particularly in an environment like this where we had a lot of breeze, to try to hang plastic or something else on the siding is definitely not practical. The stone definitely is not as easy to clean up, but because it wasn't as much surface area, and it's also difficult to get painter's tape to adhere well to that stone, and just the breeze flopping plastic in the wind, we decided to not worry about covering that, but to just slow the pace down of our application when we were working above the stone, and really be cognizant that we weren't overloading the brush and the roller with heavy paint, increasing the risk of drips, and just took our time. And then when we were done, we were always studying the stone if we were to get a splatter on it, which we didn't. But if we did, we were going to be in position with a damp rag and a small brush to get that cleaned up right away so that, there wasn't evidence of that happening. All right, now let's take a look at how we prepared these surfaces. And don't forget, we had 3 different substrates we were working with. We had aluminum gutters, cedar fascia, and vinyl soffit. You're going to see that we had a lot of dirty substrates that needed to be cleaned up. We had some sections of the cedar that had flaking, peeling paint that needed to be scraped off. We did a lot of scuff sanding throughout, where we also had to do some residual wipe down of the sanding dust. And then last but not least, we applied a very good high bonding extreme bond primer that will work great for all 3 of those substrates. So you can see how dirty that vinyl soffit was, some mildew stains there. We utilized this bucket that attached perfectly to the lift bucket bars and just had some nice room temperature water up there with a rag and brush combination. Didn't use, any bleach-based cleaners or anything, given this particular application where we wouldn't have wanted to discolor anything down below that we weren't working on. You could certainly use a mild detergent, but we were having really good success getting all that surface dirt and mildew right off the hard surface. Vinyl was pulling right off. Really nice. We were making sure that we were able to get into all these pits, pockets, and I guess I'm breathing a little heavy there. Maybe I got to get some cardio going, but I was definitely exerting myself and working hard here. A lot of hot days, and was really grinding on this job. So that's, I guess, where the heavy breathing's coming from. But, went through, the gutters were very dirty, so the rags did a great job pulling that all off. And we used a brush on the wood because, we don't want to get splinters with that rough cut surface and, working with a rag. Once everything was clean, we went through the areas where there was peeling, flaking stain on the fascia and scraped that away with our 5-in-1 tool. If we came across any loose nails or anything that needed to be tacked in or screwed down, we went through and did that. We also, wherever the raw wood was exposed, we went through and did some sanding. Here we're demonstrating using a medium grit sanding sponge, but certainly power tools are your friend as well. But, we're going to get that loose area down to a resilient edge. Even the hard surfaces like the vinyl and the aluminum, it's a best practice to do a little bit of scuff sanding there just to create some kind of micro scratches that allow the primer to bond even better than it normally would. Here's an example of a decal sander we took advantage of and worked that on all of the surfaces to help speed up this aspect. Regardless of what you use, you definitely want to then wipe off the residual dust with a rag. Here we're doing sanding after we had used the bonding primer, so we like to do some very light scuff sanding in between coats of primer and in between the coats of paint. You want to make sure that you're wiping away residual dust like we're doing here before you apply the paint. So for this project, we chose to not utilize a sprayer for these upper trims. We were just painting the upper trim, none of the body below. So we really wanted to keep our setup process more simplified, particularly with all of the difficult access areas that we had, trying to get to very high areas in them. Particularly with the soffit, there was a lot of really tight crevices that we needed to try to get into, which I felt like would be easier to access with a brush. We also had to get underneath some drip edge lips that the customer was concerned about. And we also were dealing with a lot of weather elements. Most days on this project, there was substantial threat of thunderstorms. We were able to navigate that for the most part, but we even had a couple tornadoes in our nearby area here in upstate New York. So a lot of management of that most days. There was substantial breeze where we were in a higher end, higher elevation neighborhood, and I'm a very risk-averse person, so I didn't want to have to be concerned or deal with the added element of overspray containment in addition to what we were already doing. So we chose to go with a combination of brush and mini roller, utilizing the Purdy Pal, and it really worked out well for us. There are some pros and cons, but ultimately we were able to get good finish quality. We were able to do it efficiently, and most importantly, we were able to make the customers very happy with our results, with no messes created or no problems with neighbors or anything like that. So, any questions about that? Feel free to put them in the comments. But with that being said, let's take a look at the Purdy Pal that we used, and then we'll start taking a look at how we went about applying paint. This is a great cut bucket beyond just using a paint can. Very easy to accommodate two different types of applicators. You can see that we have the ability to use a micro roller or whiz roller and put the paint down in there, and we got our ability to roll out right here. We have a spot to hook our roller handle to, and then we have a magnetized area where it will hold our brush right there. So very easy to go up and down a ladder. It has the handle here, which you can attach a pot hook to, which can hook to the ladder. And you have a very nice kind of ergonomic friendly handle here, so if you're not up on a ladder, you can carry this pal like this. Really awesome tool for exterior painting. We chose Sherwin-Williams Emerald Rain Refresh in the satin finish for its outstanding durability and self-cleaning technology. When you're using the brush, you want a very light load. I'll actually either tap some off here on the side of the bucket or even on the whiz roller or here, very lightly loaded. And then we'll go through, and I always kind of start here. I'm going to crash this underlip, really make sure I'm doing a good job getting that back lip of the fascia. Crashing it here, crashing that vinyl strip. Really crashing the backside with the brush. Make sure I can do this without splattering all over. You can step up and you can see, kind of see up in here. Really make sure that we're crashing this good in here. Getting good coverage. Take it down in our the whole width of our ladder move. I'm going to do that. Then what I'll do is kind of crash
this face here. Everything else I can easily get with the roller. I'm in here. I want to really get the brush back in these little recesses back in here. And then the other thing you want to do is we got these vent holes here. Wherever we're on the flat runs the soffit. Those are obviously to allow for proper ventilation, and that's one of the downsides of brushing and rolling is it just takes a little bit more effort to get good hide without overloading those holes. You know, you're gonna maybe have a handful of holes that might get filled up on a project like this, but you don't want to just be blindly filling up these holes like that. So when you're coming through, whether it's with the roller or with the brush, if you have them kind of overloaded, all you got to do is just kind of pull through the brush. Like if we just put it on heavy like that and you kind of got them overloaded, you just got to really pull through. And you wouldn't even want to start that to begin with. But what you want to do is if that happens, you really just kind of poke at the holes like that, open them back up, and pull through. That's why you don't want to put a big blob where you have holes like that. Open them back up. You dry brush it and you pull through. We're actually, most of this flat surface with the holes we're rolling, but you really kind of pull it through like that. If you load your brush like this and you wanted to brush this versus rolling it, or you're doing that, you can always come up to a flat run like this and just kind of offload some of that material from your brush. But we're basically taking our brushes. You can kind of cut in these recesses right here with a brush. You also do have the ability to work your whiz roller in there, but the most important thing to do with the brush is cutting in those areas I just did, plus making sure you're able to get deep into these recesses like that. And then we'll fit, you know, once we get all these cut in, we'll finish with the roller. All right, cutting in these little edges is tough. You could certainly tape this edge, and we've had one of my employees has done some of these where he's taped the edge, and that's worked fine. You can definitely, you know, got to be careful you're not overloading it or flooding it out too much. But to cut in this little lip, you just want a very lightly loaded brush and really just utilizing the tip of your brush. Got to have a pretty good, relatively newer brush. You wouldn't want an old beat up banger for something like this, or you're just going to tag the heck out of this vinyl. But you would want to do this toward the early, you know, before you get out the roller. You know, once we have these cut in, you know, we're making sure that we're then crashing into these. And then what we're doing before we break out the rollers, we're just kind of cutting across like this. And then we're going through and we're rolling these out. So what I've been doing once I'm ready to roll is, you know, I'm loading up the roller pretty good, but I wouldn't want to just attack this soffit with all the holes, because I'm gonna get too much paint on there and maybe fill in those holes. So we have the gutter here. I'm kind of just trying to offload some of this paint, you know, and then, you know, I actually just start here on the gutter and just get a lot of that paint off in this wide open space here. And then you can go a couple different directions. You got flexibility, but because of all those contours, it can be a little bit trickier. You probably want to flip this around like that so that this handle isn't bumping into that. If you flip it around this way, you can pretty much tackle those contours. The other option is you can kind of go vertical, at least to get into these grooves. It's a pretty effective way of making sure you get everything covered and hit. And then, you know, we're just rolling across the top. I've even been kind of gliding across this here, but you can always then finish horizontal once you get all of that on there. And go from there. You will get a little bit of shedding with these micro rollers sometimes. So if you see that, especially early on using it in the day, just tag it with your finger and then go back over it. Early in the day, once you start using this more and more, all the shedding's done and it kind of thins out a little bit and you can use it really well. Hitting these soffits now, I want to kind of almost dry roll it. You can go back and kind of run back over these like that. But you want to be nice and dry rolling over these holes so that you're not blindly filling them up. You may get one stubborn that's filled a little bit, and as long as there's not too many of them, I wouldn't get too hung up on that. You could always, if you really wanted to make sure none of them, you could always have keep a nail in your pocket and bust those out with a nail or a nail punch or something like that, if you're really concerned about that. But we got so many holes here, we're not going to get hung up on an occasional one that is filled up. And you can see, we kind of go through, you can kind of take your edge almost like you would a brush, and you can work any light spots in those grooves and go through and roll that out. This paint's still drying up here, but you can kind of get an idea. We're getting pretty darn solid finish quality between the brush and the roller.
All right, guys, let's finish up this video with a quick discussion on our cleanup processes. And I got some tips and tricks for cleaning any residual paint bleed through from tape or any drips or tags on the vinyl. Kind of give you some best practices on cleaning up some of those miscellaneous things before you complete the project. Take a look. It can be common to have a little bit of bleed through painter's tape when you're applying it to something like this stone, but look how easily it's dealt with and addressed.
All right, so very important to always have a wet rag or a damp rag either in your pocket or hanging on your ladder rung like that, or otherwise nearby, so that if you were to get a tag on vinyl like that, see how easy, you don't need to be panicked, you can take it right off of there, put your fingernail in there. Another thing you can do is you can cover up the edge of your 5-way tool like that and use the edge of your 5-way tool to very carefully scrape off any of that. But you got to remember, exterior scrutiny way up here, you're not even going to see that from ground level. We're right on top of it looking at it straight on. You're looking at it like this from down below. But you know, we in this section we didn't tape it, but sometimes even if you tape it, you might get a little bleed through depending on what type of tape you're using and whatnot. But you can see that this works good for this too. You just want to make sure, especially anything that's really overloading or spilling onto the face of this vinyl, you just kind of take it off, and you can kind of pull it off like that. Just to give you an idea, you can just kind of really lightly take it, and then if you have any concerns about seeing that, or if you do see something from the ground, that's how easy it is to address that and take care of that. You know, when we're working overhead all this vinyl, you know, we're using brushes and mini rollers so that we got really good control and we're not having to worry about major overspray problems or splatter. But you know, there's always potential for a drip or splatter to come down onto this open area. We're experienced, so we haven't had much of that, but it certainly can happen, and I'm always looking out and double checking my work area before I move on, because vinyl surfaces like this, as long as you catch it when it's wet or relatively fresh, you can very easily wipe paint right off of the vinyl. It's not practical to try to cover up all this vinyl when you're outdoor and we're in a breezy environment. It's a lot of wasted time and energy. This spot has been sitting here for at least a day, so it's a lot easier if you catch this when it's wet. It'll wipe right off. My rag isn't particularly wet either, but I'm just going to kind of get most of this with a wet rag. Go back to the trick where we got the rag on our 5-way tool here, and we can really kind of work this out of there. Again, I'm only needing to do this because I let it dry on here for a couple of days and didn't notice it. You obviously wouldn't want to have to clean up a bunch of these like this, but that's why you get some good skills with your brush.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful and informative. And if you did, please help Braun's Painting Network grow by subscribing today. Happy painting.